The second lesson for this morning is taken from the Gospel of John, the 13th chapter. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. And having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he'd come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. After he'd washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also must be ready to wash one another's feet. For I've set you an example that you also should do as I've done to you. Once you realize these things, you will find your happiness in doing them." Let us bow. Eternal God, lift from us some of the preoccupations and cares that dog our steps, especially in this season, that we may find a quiet oasis where we may be open to a word which will be new strength and new life. In the Spirit of Jesus, Amen. Well, the darkening mornings and the chill winds remind us that the earth has taken another spin around the sun, and we're confronted with those twin celebrations again, the coming of Christ and the going of another year. Strange mixture of feelings associated. Men and women scrambling, wondering how they'll get ready, how they will survive 13 parties in a row. Children antsy with anticipation, wondering if that day will ever arrive. Someone in the church school said that one of our little children picked up baby Jesus from the creche the other day in that little wooden manger so common with the carvings of Oberammergau, and said, "Look, baby Jesus in his car seat." Clergy are disgruntled as usual, wondering how the holiday ever got away from them. Now, of course, there's nothing new about that. We have a letter written by an American bishop in 1827. The devil has stolen Christmas from us. The devil has stolen Christmas, the day of our spiritual redemption, and converted it into a day of worldly festivity, whooting and swearing. Whooting, W-H-O-O-T-I-N-G. Anybody know what that is? Doesn't sound very appropriate in any event. Or if you want, here's the 4th century. Libanius in Rome, the impulse to spend seizes everyone in this season. He who the whole year through has taken pleasure in saving and piling up his wealth becomes suddenly extravagant. So we have to keep God in Christmas, we say. We have to keep Christ in Christmas. A couple living in a Manhattan apartment were pleased to find at their door one morning a lovely Christmas card which read, "God bless your Christmas with joy," from the custodial staff. They thought, how nice, put it on the stack and forgot it. A week later, they were surprised to find the same guard again at the door, only this time it read, "God bless your Christmas with joy," from the custodial staff. Second notice. But what if that's not the right question at all, keeping God or Christ in Christmas? If we take the story seriously as a story about the ways of God with our world, not just as the story of event, but the story as parable, we find nothing about human beings getting him in or keeping him out. We find rather a story about God making himself present in his own time and on his own terms. We hear about a God who can take care of himself as far as this world and you and I are concerned. And the question the story asks is rather, will we be alert to his coming when it happens? Will we in fact sense his presence in our lives when he does make his move? That's what the old story is concerned about, not about whether God exists, because you can't decide that question in abstract neutrality anyway. Not about the nature of God, what He is like, because that question is and will always remain beyond the capacities of your mind and mine. Rather the question, if God were to be a real part of your life, how would you know? What would it feel like? What is the presence of God in your life all about, after all? And if you take that question to the old story, the answer is pretty consistent and simple. The theologians like to say God is present to you as Word and Spirit. That is, He is presence. He is present to you in the experience that life has meaning, and in the experience that you can handle it, that you have the strength to live it out, the experience of new purpose that we didn't invent, and new power not our own. This is the way God is present to our lives. This God, if He's present at all. And whenever we know ourselves as important to the universe, and whenever we feel ourselves energized to fulfill that purpose, we are in touch with God. Parenthetically, this is why the old story insists that every human being is on the hunt for God. Because human beings, in the first case, cannot exist, survive, unless they feel that there's some meaning and point to their activities. Anton Chekhov, in his play The Three Sisters, has one of the characters say, I think a human being has got to have some faith, or at least he's got to seek faith, otherwise his life will be empty. How can you live and not know why the cranes fly, why children are born, why stars shine in the sky? You must either know why you live, or else nothing matters finally. Everything's just wild grass. On occasion, young people will attempt to take their life. Why? Not because they lack food, clothing, or shelter, but because they lack hope, which is to say they lack the experience of meaning. And sooner or later, we all have to find some way of coping that runs beyond our own energies and resources. But the trouble is, we invariably look in the wrong places for this God, for meaning and for power. The compulsiveness of a lot of buying and accumulation suggests that people vaguely and inchoately feel that that may fill up some void in their life, give their life some focus and direction. Of course, none of us deliberately and consciously say to ourselves, let alone to others, the meaning of my life is to earn as much money as possible in order to accumulate as much of earthly goods as possible. None of us say that, but watch us. Calvin, my favorite theologian, Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and his favorite, it's no accident he's called Calvin, by the way. Calvin and his favorite Tiger Hobbes are walking along as Calvin expounds on Christmas. Yep, Christmas is just around the corner. And what better way to celebrate a religious holiday than with a month of frenzied consumerism? And Hobbes says, I'm surprised the other religions haven't picked up on that. And Calvin says, well, getting loads of loot is a very spiritual experience for me. And of course, there's the bumper sticker I still see from time to time. He who dies with the most toys wins. But it's rarely conscious. It's something we slide into rather than choose. Or we seek for meaning in labor, in frenetic activity, in doing. Or we look for meaning in diversion. The Bears have added a lot of meaning to the lives of many in the last month or two. And I really don't begrudge them that. It's safer than some pursuits of meaning, I know. Or we search for meaning in some cause. The single-issue people are often empty people in search of a crusade that will fill them up and make them important. But we will have meaning, or we will despair of life itself. I'm really not that important. Those are deadly words in precisely the literal sense of them. Meaning and strength, coping resources beyond our own. Sooner or later, we all hit the wall and reach out for help. But where do we reach out for help? I have asked people about the experience of Coke. And they tell me you feel powerfully alive, like you can handle anything. People don't use that because it's a bad experience, but because it is an empowering experience. And why do our kids get together of Saturday night and drink? Because they're thirsty? Because they feel socially inadequate, they're scared, and booze makes them feel competent. And why do we run to the therapist? Now, I happen to be a therapist, so I'm not against therapy, but the expectations that human beings bring to the therapist outrun what any human being can deliver. Meaning and strength. And when God finally does come into our lives, that's what he feels like. Those are the signs of his presence. New purpose and new power. And in a way, I really think they're two sides of the same coin. At least whenever I feel some new purpose surging in my soul, it seems to come with the strength to tackle it. I think Helen Keller says it as well as anybody. Helen Keller, you remember, born blind and deaf, but who matured through incredible struggle and challenge to give to the world so much. She writes, "Through trust in God alone, I fulfill the two senses that I lack, sight and hearing, and I build out upon very imperfect speech. The presence of God is the ingenuity to bring me insight. I know where I'm going. Could I win out on a half soul, seeing nothing but defiance in my awkward walk and my inability to do even the simplest thing unaided, I would slide back into the devouring void and the universe would crush me. But in my doubly shadowed world, trust in the presence of God gives me reason for trying to draw harmony out of a marred instrument, and trust in God is my working energy." Reason, energy, meaning, strength. But if this is the case, how does it happen to us? And when? Wherein does life take on, again and again, new meaning and new strength? Well, the Christmas story suggests it's not at our disposal. We can't plan or program it in. We cannot ritualize it and force it. That's the way we would like it, wouldn't we? I want to know once for all, shall I get married? Shall I get divorced? Is business the meaning of my life? Or social work? Or motherhood? How can I get up every morning able? Give me the formula, the mantra, the fix. Lay down the 7 habits of highly purposeful and powerful people. Just show me how to do it. Notice how we go at Christmas. We want everything just right, don't we? Why? Because if everything is just right, if everybody stays well, if we don't get irritable, if the dinner is beautiful and the ambiance is perfect, and the night lovely with stars, well then what? Then we'll all feel good and be inspired and know peace. So we set out to do it. To manage and control the spirit of the holiday, organize, manipulate the scene and everybody around us, and in our determination to make it right, we almost guarantee that it will never come off. For the spirit of the holiday is like the wind. It blows where it will, and no one knows from whence it comes and where it goes. Quoth Jesus. Let me pass on a favorite Christmas pageant story. A Yale University professor tells the story of his 4-year-old son in nursery school who brought home the notice that he was to be in a Christmas pageant and that the parents were to take advantage of this great cultural opportunity. When he and his wife read that, they determined they weren't going to show. But when the second notice arrived that their son was to play the part of a shepherd in the pageant, now they felt obliged to attend. The pageant met all of their expectations. It was awful. The house lights dimmed, and 3 Virgin Marys emerged from the wings, stood over a box of straw, and waved to their relatives in the crowd. The professor wondered if some new religious doctrine was being promulgated with 3 Marys, until his wife whispered to him that the school had acquired as a gift 3 very valuable Mary costumes over the years, so some crazy logic indicated that all 3 costumes had to be used. A moment later, 2 Josephs took their place next to the 3 Marys and stood there scratching themselves. The next entrance was made by the angels. 20 little girls floated on stage wearing flowing gowns and immense wings. Then came the shepherds dressed in burlap robes, and at this point, low comedy became fiasco. Seems that during the rehearsals, the director had wisely placed chalk marks on the stage for positioning the angels and the shepherds so as to achieve some degree of symmetry. Each of them was to stand on their assigned chalk mark. This had worked beautifully in rehearsal with the kids wearing their everyday clothes. But now with the huge angel wings, there wasn't enough room, and each angel took up not only her own mark, but a shepherd's mark as well. So then the shepherds began claiming their territory, resulting in much pushing and shoving and tugging at angel wings. And finally, one little shepherd, instantly recognized by the professor and his wife as their own son, turned to the audience and shouted at the top of his voice, "Those pushy angels are fouling up the whole show." The professor says some people thought the pageant was ruined, but he and his wife considered it, in fact, the most Christmassy pageant they had ever seen. And I think they're right. Because you see, the very first Christmas was not at all the serene scenes of your Christmas cards and the carefully planned choreography of the Crystal Cathedral. The first Christmas, according to the story, was a mess. A chaotic, unorganized mess filled with human need and indifference and stubbornness and despair and hope and discouragement. And it was right there that God made himself most present, and it is right there that he is always most present. And most miss him because of the incongruity of that all. But there are always a few who are open, like lowly shepherds and crazy seers from the East, who are open and who discover that that's where meaning and power comes, in the middle of the mess. Look at that scene before the Last Supper. Fateful night before he's to go his way to death at the hands of the really impressive and important. Little matter of dusty feet and no disciple willing to do the dirty, incidental service before supper. Something that was part of that culture and that happened at every meal and was simply understood would happen. So Jesus, knowing that he'd come from God and was going to God, took a basin and a towel and did the simple, needful thing. And then said, if you learn to do this in life, you'll know what meaning and strength are all about. You will be happy, fulfilled. Question: what if the major meaning of our lives does not lie finally in our plans and projects and schemes and crusades and careers, important and necessary as these may be to fill up our days? But what if the real meaning and energy comes as we're open to the small touches and tasks that bump into us in the course of the day? I shall never forget the minister who said once, for years I bemoaned the untold interruptions which stood in the way of my ministry, until one day I realized that the interruptions were my ministry. But what if that's the real truth for all of us? What if the ultimate purpose and dynamic of life, what if God himself is found and known in the interruptions? The spouse whose pot is low, the child whose heart is hurting or who needs a little time, the colleague whose world has collapsed, the neighbor who needs a cup of cold water. What if this is where God is really present to us? That's where we know what we all desperately want to know, that we are important and that we can manage anything life throws at us. Several years ago, as he got off the train every day at Grand Central Station to go to his job on Wall Street, Mr. Estes began noticing an increasing number of people living there, and he particularly was caught up by one person that he saw there morning after morning, a woman in her 40s with a black poodle, until one day he did it, couldn't believe it. Hello, my name is Jean. Hello, my name is Patricia Keresy. Pat, this is Ebony. Patricia, why are you here? I live here. And with this, Jean Estes entered the upside-down world of the homeless. Meanwhile, Ms. Keresy and her dog attracted the attention of a photographer who got the homeless woman and the investment banker both hooked up with a church-sponsored program called the Jericho Project. And for Ms. Keresy, Jericho Project, located in a leased hotel in Manhattan's Upper West Side, became her home. For Mr. Estes, by his own words, it became new life. Member of the board, financial advice at the Friday night meetings of the tenants, but more than that, getting to know them and care about them. And nobody has to tell Mr. Estes today that his life has meaning. No one. Does that mean you have to go work with the homeless? That's not the point. It means that you're more likely to find meaning and strength in God if you stay alert to the ways He may just interrupt your life one of these days. Unexpected ways, like in a little baby or in dirty feet. Janet Ruffing, in her book Uncovering Stories of Faith, tells how several years ago a group of computer salesmen from Milwaukee went to a regional sales convention here in Chicago. They assured their wives they would be home in plenty of time for dinner. But with one thing or another, the meeting ran overtime, so the men had to race to the station, tickets in hand. As they hurried through the station, one man inadvertently kicked over a table supporting a basket of apples. Without stopping, they all reached the train and boarded it with a sigh of relief. All but one. He paused at the door, something troubling him, a scene that had flashed before his eyes. He waved goodbye to his companions and returned to the station, and he was glad he did. The 10-year-old was apparently blind. Salesman gathered up the apples, noticed several were bruised, reached for his wallet, said to the boy, "Here, please take this 10 for the damage we did. I hope it didn't spoil your day." Now, the man from whom this story comes swears that as he walked away, he heard this bewildered, sightless kid call out, "Hey, mister, are you Jesus?" He wasn't about to draw any such conclusion, he says, but it did give him pause, and he got on the late train a stronger and happier human being. Once you have realized these things, he said, you will find your happiness in doing them. You will find your God in a towel,